The night had swallowed the small Oregon town when Isabella Navarro turned off the clinic lights. The wind scratched against the windows, and the sound of heavy rain made the world outside feel distant. She was about to lock the door when she heard the pounding hard, desperate, almost human, almost wild. For a second, she thought it might be an injured animal, until she heard the voice. Hoarse, weak, please. Then came silence, the kind that's worse than any sound. On the other side of the frosted glass, a figure swayed. Tall, imposing, covered in something dark that dripped down his coat. Blood. Isabella's heart pounded like a drum. Part of her wanted to run, but the doctor in her overpowered the fear. She opened the door just enough for the man to collapse into her arms. He was huge, heavy, and his body carried the metallic scent of danger. The floor turned red under the cold clinic light. Isabella dragged him onto the exam table, her hands trembling as she grabbed the emergency kit. The wound was deep, a clean gunshot, and fresh. She hesitated. This wasn't a hunting accident. His breathing was uneven, but his eyes, intense, alert, alive. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a wounded hunter. Apollo, her German shepherd who never trusted strangers, approached carefully. The dog sniffed the blood, lifted his head, and instead of growling lay down beside the table. Isabella froze. Apollo's instincts were sharper than hers, and for some reason, he trusted this man. A man who could barely say his own name. Dante Moretti. She cleaned the wound with alcohol and stitched it using veterinary needles. Each stitch felt like a silent pact between fear and courage. Dante didn't complain. He just watched her, as if trying to read her soul. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, time seemed suspended. Two strangers bound by something they couldn't yet understand. When she finished, Isabella covered him with the sheet and stepped back, trying to catch her breath. Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside, his breathing filled the room. For the first time in a long while, she felt something shift, something that told her nothing about that night would ever be forgotten. The clinic was bathed in shadows, lit only by the soft blue glow of the monitors. The smell of blood and disinfectant hung in the air. Isabella washed her hands, but the image of Dante on the table stayed with her. He was unlike anyone she'd ever met, wounded, mysterious, but carrying a calm that defied pain. She tried to tell herself he was just another patient. Deep down, though, she knew there was something far more dangerous about him. He woke before dawn, his gaze steady and composed, as if he had never passed out. "You saved me," he murmured, his voice rough, barely a whisper. Isabella didn't answer. The silence between them was its own kind of wall. As she changed the bandage, she noticed an old scar on his shoulder, and the way his eyes scanned the room. That wasn't fear, it was vigilance. The look of a man who spent his life at war. As time passed, their conversation began to flow. He said he'd been ambushed but avoided names, places, or details. His large hands only trembled when he mentioned them. She could sense the weight of a violent past, and a kind of pain that didn't come from wounds alone. He carried guilt, and somehow, that guilt was what kept him alive. With every word, Isabella sank deeper into uncertainty. Who was this man she was really caring for? Hours later, headlights cut through the curtains. Two men were knocking, demanding shelter. Isabella froze. Dante, still injured, pushed himself up and gestured for her to stay quiet. The tension became unbearable. Outside, voices asked about a wounded man. Inside, her heartbeat pounded like a drum. Lying had never been in Isabella's nature, but when she opened the door, the words came out on instinct. "No one's been here." The men watched her carefully, suspicion in their eyes, before finally walking away. The lie hung in the air like heavy smoke. And in that moment, she knew she had crossed an invisible line. Their fates were now bound together. Dante looked at her with quiet gratitude. He didn't need to say a word. One look was enough to seal a silent pact between them. Outside, the tires screeched against the wet road. Inside, trust began to take root, fragile, dangerous, and inevitable. Something was shifting, and the danger felt closer than ever. The rain had stopped, but the night was even quieter. The distant sound of an engine made Isabella's heart race. The dirt road rarely saw visitors. Dante, still weak, rose from the table and reached for his empty holster. "They're back." The word sounded like a warning. Isabella rushed to the window and saw headlights slicing through the darkness. Two men, the same ones as before. The danger had found its way back. Her breath caught for a second. Adrenaline turned fear into movement. She hid Dante behind a metal cabinet and wiped the bloodstains off the floor with a damp cloth. Every motion felt like it stretched time itself. Footsteps approached. The tires stopped. A loud bang shook the door, followed by a deep voice. "We know he's in there." The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Isabella opened the door, her gaze steady despite her shaking hands. "It's just me and my dog here." The lie came out calm, almost rehearsed. The man looked inside, his stare heavy, doubtful. Apollo growled softly beside her, guarding his owner, and somehow that seemed to convince them. After a few eternal seconds, they turned around and left. The sound of the engine fading down the road was the only proof they were still alive. When the door closed, Dante stepped out from hiding, his face tense with anger and guilt. "Now they know about you," he said coldly. "You can't stay here." Isabella tried to argue, but his expression left no room for debate. This man, a stranger she barely knew, was about to pull her into something far bigger than she could imagine. A world where promises were sealed with blood. He gave her a choice: stay and take the risk, or go with him for 48 hours until the danger passed. Isabella looked at him, torn between fear and the strange sense of safety he made her feel. The air felt thick, as if fate itself had paused to listen to her answer. "I'll go with you." The words left her lips before she could think. Dante simply nodded. Outside, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of gray and orange. Isabella took one last look at the clinic, the safe haven that was now just a memory. Every step toward the car felt like a silent surrender to the unknown. And deep down, she knew this was the beginning of something that would change everything. The road wound through the Cascade Mountains like a scar beneath the cloudy sky. The car moved between thick trees and heavy fog. Isabella stared out the window, wondering when crossing borders with the fugitive had become something she was capable of. Dante drove in silence, his face rigid, his eyes fixed on the road. Every turn seemed to hide more than it revealed. The feeling of being watched never left her. After hours of driving, the fortress appeared a structure of stone and steel, isolated deep within the mountains. Armed guards opened the gate without saying a word. Isabella's stomach tightened. This wasn't just a hideout, it was a base, an empire built in silence. Inside, the air smelled of power and secrets. She realized then that Dante wasn't a man running from something, he was the kind of man the world ran from. That's when she met Bianca Moretti, Dante's sister. Elegant, cold, her eyes sharp and calculating. Bianca didn't ask who Isabella was, she simply said, "So you're the one who saved him." The word sounded more like a statement than a question. That night, over glasses of wine and whispered conversations, the truth surfaced. Dante Moretti was the head of the Portland Mafia, a man at war with Claudio Barone, a traitor allied with the Russian mob. Isabella felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. The blood she had saved belonged to a dangerous man, and the hands she had stitched together had taken lives. Yet even as fear crept in, another part of her refused to retreat. She had seen something different in Dante, something human, real, wounded in ways that went beyond flesh. Bianca watched her quietly, as if recognizing the beginning of something inevitable. In the days that followed, Dante regained his strength, and the silence between them turned into a kind of unspoken bond. He showed her the gardens, spoke about his father, about the weight of the Moretti name. She listened, surprised to find that behind the power, there was also remorse. It was as if, by stepping away from the world, he could finally breathe. And Isabella began to understand why Apollo had trusted him that night. But even surrounded by the mountains, the sense of danger never left. Each sunset carried the echo of distant helicopters and gunfire, a reminder that the world hadn't forgotten Dante Moretti. And now, no matter how much she tried to deny it, Isabella was part of that story. There was no going back. The days in the mountains began to take on a rhythm of their own. Isabella woke to the faint hum of helicopters and the smell of coffee drifting from the main kitchen. Dante was already there, dressed in black, calm, unshaken. Yet something had shifted between them, a quiet tension, a bond that grew without permission. She approached with clean bandages, and he accepted them as if each touch healed more than just wounds. At night, the house seemed to breathe with them. The sound of the wind against the windows blended with the silence, heavy with unspoken confessions. That was when Dante spoke about his lost brother, about the promises that had turned him into a leader. Isabella listened quietly, no judgment, only presence. And in that space between words, fear gave way to empathy. For a moment, the dangerous man before her seemed almost human. Their eyes began to linger, their hands met by accident. A brief touch in the hallway became the start of something neither of them dared to name. The line between right and wrong dissolved in an instant. And when their first kiss happened, the world outside seemed to stop. It was passion tangled with despair, a refuge in the middle of chaos. A kiss that promised everything and nothing at once. But not everyone saw it that way. Vito Romano, Dante's right-hand man, watched from afar with concern. He knew the price of getting involved with someone outside the circle. Loyalty forced him into silence, but instinct warned him that this would end in pain. Still, Vito said nothing, because in Dante's eyes, he saw something he had never seen before: peace. In the hours that followed, trust deepened. Dante began sharing parts of his life, his plans to walk away from crime, his wish for a new beginning. Isabella believed him. She saw him laugh for the first time, play with Apollo, and for a moment, it felt impossible to imagine that this man had ever been tied to death. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel. Maybe even the darkest souls could find redemption. But peace in the mountains is deceptive. The wind carries secrets, and silence hides truths waiting for the right moment to strike. There was something in Vito's eyes, a shadow Isabella couldn't quite read. And deep down, a part of her already knew love born from danger never comes without scars. The morning started quietly, but something felt off. Isabella woke up alone, the cold sheet beside her revealing Dante's absence. The stillness of the house felt unsettling. Apollo nudged at the locked office door, restless. Curiosity outweighed fear, and for the first time, she crossed a line. On Vito's phone, left forgotten on the table, a series of messages caught her eye. Her name was in them, and a plan. Her blood turned to ice, each word cut like a knife. The vet has been located. She lured him to the clinic. The contact is made. The truth crashed over Isabella like an avalanche. Everything, the encounter, the rescue, the escape, had been orchestrated. She was the bait, a pawn in a war she never asked to be part of. Her heart, once filled with hope, now beat with anger and disbelief. When Dante walked into the room, he found a different kind of silence. Isabella stood there, phone in hand, eyes locked on him. So that's what this was. I was just part of your plan? Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned. Dante stopped, took a deep breath. He didn't lie. He admitted that at first, yes, it had all been strategy, but what he hadn't planned on was falling in love. The confession landed like an open wound, honest, but not enough. She stepped back, silent tears streaming down her face. You even stole my right to choose. The words cut like blades. Dante tried to move closer, but she took another step back. The distance between them now felt impossible to cross. Everything he had wanted to protect, he had destroyed. The love born from ashes was breaking in the same fire that had created it. Without looking back, Isabella packed her things. Vito tried to stop her, but the determination in her eyes was unshakable. Apollo followed her to the door, reluctant. Outside, the mountain wind bit at her skin, but the pain inside was worse. Dante watched her leave without a word, without a gesture, only with the weight of someone who realizes too late that love doesn't survive lies. The car disappeared down the winding road, taking with it everything that was still pure. Dante stood motionless, tasting the bitterness of loss. In the distance, the sound of approaching engines echoed a warning that by losing Isabella, he had also lost the only thing keeping him safe. The road back to the clinic was long and lonely. The sun rose weakly through the clouds, reflecting in the rearview mirror against Isabella's tired eyes. She tried to convince herself that everything would be fine, that she just needed to forget. But the heart doesn't listen to logic. The silence shattered when headlights appeared in the mirror. Another car was speeding toward her. Instinct took over. Apollo barked sharply, and then gunfire. Metallic sounds ripped through the air. The glass shattered. The car spun out of control, stopping at the edge of the road. When Isabella opened her eyes, chaos surrounded her. Armed men emerged from the shadows, faces covered. She tried to run, but rough hands grabbed her. Shouts, orders, the name, Claudio Barone, echoing like a sentence. The world went dark. Fear took over. Hours later, Dante got the news. Vito burst in, face pale. They took her. Time stopped. Dante felt the air leave his lungs. Rage and despair fused into something primal. He swept everything off the table: maps, weapons, contracts, and made the only choice left: to give up everything for Isabella. Territory, money, power, none of it mattered anymore. While being held captive, Isabella realized Claudio wasn't just cruel, he was calculating. He spoke of Dante with hatred, not the kind that sought victory, but annihilation. "You were his mistake," he said with a twisted smile. Isabella met his gaze, trembling inside, but refusing to look away. She knew fear was what he wanted, and she wouldn't give it to him. There was something of Dante in her now, a strength he no longer recognized in himself. Dante prepared for the rescue. The Moretti house turned into a war room. Armed men, drawn maps, phones ringing, the city on alert. Bianca tried to stop him. "If you go, you won't come back the same." He only replied, "I haven't been the same since I lost her." Love had changed him, and now it would be both his reason and his price. In a warehouse by the docks, Claudio waited, certain he had won. But the roar of engines said otherwise. Hell was coming, and Dante Moretti was bringing it with him. The war had begun, and no bullet on earth could stop a man fighting for the only love he had left. Night fell over the port like a curtain of smoke. The abandoned warehouse trembled with the distant growl of engines. Inside, Isabella struggled against her bindings, her wrists cut raw by the ropes. The air reeked of gasoline and rust, thick and suffocating. She could hear laughter, footsteps, and Dante's name spat out like a curse. "He's coming," she whispered, more to herself than out of belief. Outside, hell ignited. Dante stepped out of the car in silence, eyes of steel reflecting the flicker of flames spreading through the containers. Bianca's voice crackled through the radio, but he didn't answer. Vito, standing beside him, said only, "There's no going back after this." Dante's reply was quiet, final. There never was. Within moments, the gunfire began, sharp, relentless, tearing through the night. Chaos consumed the port. Men shouted and scattered through fire and smoke. Dante moved like a ghost with a gun, every shot precise, every step driven by desperation. Flames danced in his eyes, and for a moment, he looked like hell itself had taken human form. Through the smoke, he saw her, bound, bleeding, but alive. Claudio Barone appeared behind her, using her as a shield. "One move, and she dies." His voice echoed through the blaze. Dante froze, heart pounding like a war drum. Their eyes locked, and time stood still. Then, in a flash of courage, Isabella jerked away, breaking his aim. Dante fired. The gunshot split the air. Claudio fell. The building began to collapse. Steel beams buckled under the heat, the ceiling groaning like a wounded beast. Dante rushed to Isabella, cutting her loose with his bare hands, lifting her into his arms. The fire swallowed the walls as they ran. The explosion hit seconds later, a wave of heat that nearly threw them to the ground. But through the ashes and smoke, they were still breathing. Lying on the damp sand of the dock, both wounded, they looked at each other in silence. No words were needed. The world could burn around them, but in that moment, something stronger than pain remained. Something that survived the fire, and Isabella knew that. No matter how it had begun in blood, chaos, and lies, their love was being reborn. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air when Isabella opened her eyes. She was in a secluded medical facility, surrounded by soft light and silence. Dante's hands rested over hers, firm, warm, wrapped in bandages. He looked exhausted, his body covered in wounds, but his gaze was calm. For the first time, Isabella saw him without his armor, just a man who had lost everything and still chose to love. Around them, the Moretti family was rebuilding what was left of their empire. Bianca gave orders cold and precise, while Vito watched Dante with quiet respect. But Dante seemed to hear no one. He was lost in Isabella's eyes, in the weight of everything that had happened. "You're free," he said, voice rough but steady. "I've cleared every debt. The clinic's yours again. And if you want to go, you can." The words sounded simple, but inside them lived an immense sacrifice. Isabella watched him without saying a word. The man standing before her was no longer the Mafia boss, but someone who had defied fate itself for her. "And what if I want to stay?" she asked. The question lingered in the air like a confession. Dante looked away, unable to hide the emotion in his eyes. "Then stay, but this time, make the choice for yourself." And for the first time, she saw a genuine smile break through the pain. In the days that followed, Isabella slowly recovered. Dante, still wounded, began rebuilding what was left of his life. But everything felt different. The mansion, once a symbol of power, now breathed peace. The guards were fewer, the business cleaner, and amid the rebuilding, something quiet and true was growing, a partnership built on honesty and choice. One cold afternoon, Isabella called him out to the balcony. "If we're going to start over, it has to be with me, not over me." Dante nodded, understanding every word. Her love wasn't submission, it was courage. He accepted it without resistance, because he knew that anything built without truth was destined to fall. As the sun set behind the mountains, Isabella walked to him and took his hand. Neither of them spoke. The silence was enough. It was the kind of peace that doesn't come from forgetting, but from choosing to stay even after the storm. And in that moment, they both knew that the past had finally lost its power to wound them. 6 months later, the golden sun rose over the Oregon hills. Isabella's clinic thrived like never before, and Apollo ran freely across the courtyard, full of life. The sound of horse hooves mixed with laughter echoing from the veranda. Isabella divided her days between the clinic and Dante's home, finding the balance she had always longed for. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was something real, earned through scars and forgiveness. At the Moretti mansion, the tension of the old days had turned into family. Bianca, once cold, now smiled more often. Vito, the man of few words, played with Apollo, unable to hide his affection. It was as if, somehow, everyone had found redemption in Isabella's presence. The woman once seen as a weakness had become the bond that held the remnants of an empire together. During dinner, the long table glowed with candlelight and quiet laughter. Dante watched Isabella talking with Bianca, and a rare peace filled his eyes. When he lifted his glass, the room fell silent. "To new beginnings," he said. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. The soft click of the clasp sounded like a heartbeat. Isabella looked up, surprised. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Inside was a simple ring, modest and pure, a symbol of promise. Dante knelt before her, his gaze steady, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't want to keep you. I want to walk beside you. Will you?" The silence filled with emotion before she answered, "Yes." The word came between tears and a smile. Bianca clapped her hands. Vito raised his glass, and the room erupted in applause. But for Dante and Isabella, The sound felt distant. They could only hear each other, the steady rhythm of two hearts that had survived the impossible. In that moment, love was no longer a consequence. It was a choice. Outside, the city lights shimmered in the distance. The cold wind brushed against the windows, a quiet reminder that the world could still be cruel. But inside that house, there was warmth. And between kisses and silent promises, Isabella realized she had finally found what she'd been searching for all along, a home built on truth, courage, and love. So, what did you think of this story? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoy emotional love stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you won't miss the next one.